We appreciate this guy who joins us now. Good friend, Baylor grad, Shehan Jeyarajah of CBS Sports is with us. Hey, man, good to see you. Thank you for your time this morning. How are things?
They're great. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you for your time. You are in great demand, and that's a credit to you and your work and what you've accomplished. And I know you were at the Big 12 spring meetings last week. I want to get your thoughts being on the inside there. First off, the Big 12 football coaches voted unanimously, right, in favor of a 24-team playoff. What's the inside story on that?
Yeah, there was a lot of interest from the Big 12 coaches on the 2014 playoff. And for people who don't know, really 3 of the 4 major conferences have coalesced behind this idea of the 2014 playoff. Kind of the case that's been made is, for one, I mean, the level of access would be much greater for a lot of the teams across the country. You know, in the Big 12, for example, last year, of course, there was only one playoff team in the 12-team playoff. With a 24-team playoff, there would have been as many as 5 Big 12 teams represented in a 24-team college football playoff. So they feel like it just gives them an opportunity for more access. They feel like it gives them an opportunity to actually decide things on the field. You know, we caught up with BYU coach Kalani Sitake at Big 12 meetings, who, of course, was the second team left out of the 12-team college football playoff. He said, look, I mean, the reality is, especially with the 12-team field, if you don't win the games, you don't really have much of a right to complain. But I would have loved the opportunity to settle it on the field. And they feel like with 24, at least more of them will get that opportunity.
That's good. And what'd you say, going back a few years, 15 of the 16 Big 12 schools would have been in the playoff at least once?
Yes, that's correct. The only school that wouldn't have is Kansas, who obviously, you know, has gone through a little bit of a rough go of it. But every single other team at some point would have been there would have made the playoff at some point. And in fact, outside of Texas Tech, ironically, who of course is the class of the conference right now, every other team would have made it multiple times dating back if we had the 24-team playoff in 2014. Of course, for Baylor, they would have been in it 4 times potentially. Oklahoma State would have been in it 6 times, and Utah would have been actually the biggest beneficiary across college athletics. They would have been in it 8 times, of course. Instead, because of the 4-team and the 12-team, they haven't made it a single time.
Wow, that's wild. And that sort of speaks to why, from a coach's perspective, yes, we want bigger. You know, we want bigger is better. It's more opportunities to get your program, you know, playing in the playoff.
That's the thing, right? And it's important to note the context of this, right? Because, for example, the American Football Coaches Association did put out a statement supporting a 24-team playoff. Like I've talked about, a bunch of these coaches want to do it. But here's the other thing to keep in mind too, right, is that they are one of many interest groups involved in making this decision. Of course, it does matter what the coaches want, but they're naturally going to want a more achievable goal for their program, right? To make a 24-team playoff. Well, the decision makers involved, including the commissioners of the conferences, the SEC, of course, is the lone holdout at this point. They have to weigh a little bit more, right? Whether that be the scheduling of it. I mean, this would add at least a whole nother round of the college football playoff that you'd have to schedule. And we already have a title game, by the way, on January 25th in 2027, which is pretty darn late. You also have to weigh the television of it. I mean, the later that you go into the month of January, the more that you're trying to dodge going up against the NFL. The reason that we have a January 25th title game is because they're trying to avoid playing on Saturdays and Sundays, and also even Thursdays, when the NFL, of course, is playing games. And if they're going to try to not go up against the NFL as much as they can, you just run out of windows a little bit to keep scheduling more and more games. So the finances have to be worth it. Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark, who is in favor of the 24-team playoff, did acknowledge, look, if we were to have a 24-team playoff, we'd have to get rid of our conference title game. And we make a lot of money off of our conference championship game. So we have to make sure that the finances are worth it. So just because the coaches are in favor doesn't mean that it's an inevitability, but there really does seem to be a coalescing around 24.
Yeah, fascinating. That's great. Do you think, I mean, your personal opinion, do you think it's a foregone conclusion? Do you think we'll get there at some point to 2014 playoff?
You know, it's interesting, right? Because I mentioned it. SEC coaches and SEC administrators are a little bit less open to it. And the SEC essentially has veto power over this process. I mean, really, at its core, the SEC and the Big Ten are the two people who will formally make the decision. Yeah, what the Big 12, ACC, and everybody else says matters a little bit, but it really does come down to those two power conferences ultimately making their decision. And so right now, the SEC has been reluctant. My colleague Brandon Marcello was at SEC meetings, which were the same week as Big 12. And one thing that came out of that is a lot of the coaches, after receiving the presentation from the college football playoff staff, they actually felt like, you know what, we actually don't benefit all that much from going to 24 versus staying at 12 or moving to 16. If they move to 24, again, like I mentioned, the Big 12 would jump from 1 to 5 teams in the college football playoff. Well, the SEC would have only jumped from 5 in the 12-team playoff to 7 in the 24-team playoff. So I feel like there's a little bit of a diminishing return for them. The number that they've been pushing is 16. So look, I think we're going to have expansion at some point. It will not come in 2026. At earliest, it would come by 2027. That decision has to be made by December 1st to change it for 2027. I do think we're going to expand, but again, it kind of depends on whether the SEC, and also, by the way, the television companies as well that'll be paying for this, if they ultimately are able to make it worth everybody's while.
Right. Shehan, what are the conversations about the Big 12 possibly going to a 10-game conference schedule?
Yes. It's early in the process. I'll say that, right? And so, so this has not been decided. Same with the 20-game basketball schedule, which of course existed 2 years ago. They moved back to 18 last year. So the case for a 10-game Big 12 conference schedule is a couple things. For one, they want to continue to add to their strength of schedule, especially when you're talking about trying to get multiple teams into the college football playoff. I mean, of course, Texas Tech, for example, has gotten heat in the past couple of weeks for having a relatively easy schedule. And again, some of it is not their fault. Oregon State was a power conference team when they scheduled them. They are no longer, of course, a power conference team. But they also, again, just because of how things lie, they miss both of the Utah schools, for example, who are meant to be some of the best teams in the Big 12. So that's part of it. They want to continue to increase their strength of schedule. They want to consider trying to create more avenues to get into the playoff. The other thing too, though, that they're really trying to take into account is that in 2030, 2031, they're going to renegotiate the media rights contracts. And essentially, they want the ability to go to ESPN and Fox and say, we have a large amount of inventory. We've delivered a large amount of value to you. Because again, think about it, right? I mean, if you go from 9 games to 10 games, that's essentially, right, a 10% increase in the amount of product that you're giving to these networks. And does that mean that they're going to get 10% more worth of value in response? Not necessarily, but that's a thought, right? That's part of their process. So again, now at the same time, nobody's at 10 right now. I mean, when you're talking about 12 games, 1 guaranteed power conference game, and then 10 additional conference games, like 11 out of 12 games being power conference games starts to get pretty darn difficult for regardless of what team you are. So again, it's something that I think that they're going to have to pitch to the coaches a little bit more. I know on the basketball side, again, they are not happy with the idea of going back to a 20-game schedule. They like 18 games. They feel like it gives them more flexibility to schedule out of conference as well. But again, they're going to continue trying to figure out how they can maximize the monetary value of those media rights contracts.
I got you. Very good. What was basketball-wise, was that the main conversation about the 18 or 20-game schedule, or what else did you get from the basketball coaches?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the big things coming out. Of course, look, the Big 12 is in a great place basketball-wise. They have a fantastic group of coaches, and they were just more than anything trying to figure out how to maximize that. Again, the 20-game conference schedule is certainly going to be one part of that. They talked a little bit about tournament expansion. They felt like that was something for them that could potentially be a good thing as well. And again, like they're just trying to figure out ways to continue to market and capitalize on having the best basketball conference in the sport. I mean, again, you look at the past couple of years, Arizona obviously has come into this league. They make the national title game last year. Houston's been in the Final Four. Of course, Baylor, Kansas have been national championship teams. Like, they feel like they have an incredible group of both coaches, players, and programs. I mean, again, the number 1 and number 2 picks in the NBA draft this upcoming year are both going to be players who played in the Big 12 this past season. So on both the men's and women's side, they're trying to figure out how to continue to capitalize that, to continue to capitalize on star power, continue to capitalize on great programs and coaches, and again, try to create as much financial value for themselves as they can.
Gotcha. Very good. All right. Not a topic from the Big 12 spring meetings. Maybe it was in the back hallways, but what are your thoughts, or what do you know about Brendan Sorsby and a possible injunction that might get him on the field for Texas Tech this year?
Yeah, so on Monday, there was a formal hearing in Lubbock County Court where Brendan Sorsby's lawyers went and made his case. And the case that they made is very simple, right? There's no contention that he did not break the rules explicitly, but what they think is that the NCAA should have taken further into account his mental health and gambling addiction. And they believe that if Brendan Sorsby were to be banned for life, which is the punishment for betting on your own team's games, then it would potentially have a negative effect on players coming forward in the future to be able to disclose and get help for gambling addictions. The other piece as well is that they tried to make the case that Brendan Sorsby never bet on a game that he participated in, that when because he redshirted in 2022 during his time at Indiana, and that when he was getting ready to actually take snaps and get on the field, that he stopped after that. So that they believe that there's no reason to believe that anybody or anything could have been compromised by his gambling. Now, again, look, the NCAA's rules also are very clear that if you bet on a program, even that you're not a part of at your university, that still is subject to permanent dismissal because you have a level of inside information. And I don't think that anybody can make the case that that during his time at Indiana, that Brendan Sorsby wouldn't have had an understanding of the internals of the locker room. Like, I just don't think that that's a case you can make. Now, I think that it's also fair to say that he, based on the data that we've been presented, he likely does have a gambling addiction and he's gone and gotten help. But I think that the NCAA makes a very good point. There has never been a time in American sports where a player who gambled on their own games was then allowed to go back and continue to participate in the sport afterwards. That would be, in the case of the NCAA, irreparable harm to their ability to enforce the rules. So again, we're still waiting for a decision. It could come down any minute, or it could come later this week. We don't really necessarily know, but the judge has two options. He can either grant an injunction, which what that means is that basically Brendan Sorsby would be allowed to participate up until his trial date, which would be after the season. So for all intents and purposes, he would be granted eligibility for the 2026 season, or he can deny the injunction, which would mean that the NCAA's punishment would be in effect. And again, most likely Brendan Sorsby would not wait for trial. He would then try to enter the NFL supplemental draft later this month. So a lot rests on the decision of this one individual judge, but we're still kind of just sitting here waiting for answers.
Gotcha. Very good. Great job explaining all that. Final thought question for you, Utah and their private equity deal. And we've seen the layoff of a number of employees in the athletic department at Utah. What are your thoughts about that direction that the Utes are going right now?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big swing, just to be frank, when Utah decided to essentially privatize their athletic department, partner with private equity. And the reality is, for people who have studied sort of the trends of private equity, I mean, this is largely how it goes, right? Their job is to maximize as much profit as possible and cut as many of the costs as possible. And there's a lot of stuff about the way that especially public athletic departments run that aren't necessarily about making the most money and maximizing it, right? When you kind of get to the core of college athletics and why it exists at public universities, it's historically more of a marketing tool than a financial tool. So I think that there's going to be a short-term shock as the private equity folks come in and new leadership comes in and says, where can we cut? What's not necessary? I don't think it's going to be a long-term thing. I think they're going to, again, kind of make some cuts at the beginning and then settle into what's next. But this has been, just to be frank, like a concern for all sorts of programs who have been reluctant to take private equity money, that they'll be able to come in and meddle with some of the finances and personnel in an athletic department. I know, again, the Big 12 made a partnership with Redbird Capital, another a capital group, not an equity group. There's a little bit of a distinction. But none of the 16 schools at this point have agreed to take money from the private capital. They essentially don't want to be in a position where they owe more debt and money. So this is kind of the downside of all of it. We'll see again what's left standing whenever the private equity group is done. But Utah's kind of the first to go through this, and I think that what happens with them is going to be instructive for a lot of other programs who maybe are considering the same thing.
Wow. Very good. Great explanation again. Well, it's always great to visit with you. Thank you very much for your time. Y'all have, you're going to add to your family here coming up this summer, right?
Yes, we have our second daughter due in August. So gonna try to get as much done before then as possible, and then gonna try to rush back for the season in September.
Very cool. Great to visit with you. Holler if you come this way, and we'll see you at the Big 12 Media Days, if not before.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.